So we're extremely grateful for the Lunder Institute for making this In Conversation possible, and I'm really delighted to introduce you to the director of the Lunder Institute, Erica Wall, and hand over to her. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carol. Can we do the podium?
Oh, yes, yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Carol said, I am the director of the Lunder Institute for American Art, which is part of the Colby College Museum of Art in Waterville, Maine. So yes, I am very far from home, but very excited to be here in London for the second in our series of Lunder Institute at 2026. We kicked off the series at the Yale Center for British Art. We are here today with you. We will be at the Royal Academy of Art on Wednesday, and we will culminate the series at the Peggy Guggenheim Collection in Venice in June. So the Lunder Institute is, for all intents and purposes, a think tank. We are a think tank for the Colby College Museum of Art, for the field of American art and beyond, as we are here today. We reside at the intersection of art making, research, and scholarship. And to that end, this particular program was started in 2024 and designed to create a vehicle for conversation between institutions. We thought it very appropriate in this significant year for the United States as it acknowledges its 250th anniversary of its independence. And so we felt it important to take a look at its origin story and the relationships that formed and shaped and continue to do that to this day, but in particular to look at the significant figures who formed our art history in particular, and that is why we are here to discuss Whistler today. It is such a pleasure, and it has been such a pleasure to be in collaboration with the Tate Britain. And so I want to take this opportunity to thank the Tate Britain and all of its staff for being in partnership with us, with particular gratitude to Carol Jacoby, Isabel Muir, and all of the Tate staff, but also to our own Elisa Yerman, who is our Lunder Works on Paper curator, who worked with Carol and Isabel to design what I'm sure is going to be an amazing show. Or not show, she did design a show, but our program today. And what I also want to do is to thank always and forever the opportunity to be able to convene in this very rare way and to do it not just in the Colby community, but beyond its borders as we're here today. And that is thanks to Peter and Paula Lunder and the Lunder Foundation. And of course, I want to thank all of you for being here today with us. And so with that, I will ask you to sit back and enjoy our presentation. And I will start with the introductions of our panelists, who will then each present or share something with regard to this topic. And then we will have a short conversation and then open it up to questions and answers for you to engage with us in conversation. So I will start with the introduction of Carol Jacoby. Carol Jacoby is the Tate Britain curator of British art 1815 to 1915, but works across periods including contemporary art. Carol publishes and broadcasts on Victorian art, British art pre and post World War II, and historic photography, with special interests in under and misrepresented groups. In addition to curating the current Whistler exhibition on view, she's organized the Van Gogh in Britain, Salt and Silver Early Photography, and William Holman Hunt and the Pre-Raphaelite Vision, among others. Julia Ogaz Sotomayor is an art historian and lecturer at the University of the Andes in Santiago, Chile. Julieta holds an MA in History of Art from University of Bristol and has conducted extensive research on James McNeill Whistler, publishing and presenting research related to the artist's 1866 stay in Chile. She is a member of the Whistler Society and currently a PhD candidate focused on late 19th and early 20th century illustrated print media in Chile. Daniel E. Sutherland is a distinguished professor of art history emeritus at the University of Arkansas. He is the author of Whistler, A Life for Art's Sake, Whistler's Legacy, and co-author with Georgia Tuziari of Whistler's Mother, Portrait of an Extraordinary Life. Diana Jocelyn Greenwald is the Associate Director of Curatorial Affairs and the Lunder Curator of American Art at the National Museum of Asian Art at the Smithsonian. Her recent projects include a museum in the making, opening in June, Shifting Boundaries, Perspectives on American Landscapes, and Ruffled Feathers, Making Whistler's Peacock Room. Previously curator of American art at the Portland Museum of Art in Maine, Greenwald is currently developing an exhibition on art and visual culture in American Chinatowns. Horace Ballard is the Theodore E. Stebbins Curator of American Art at the Fogg Harvard Art Museums. His research interests include 18th and 19th century portraiture, aesthetic anxieties of modernity, and the visual and material cultures of religion across the Americas. He's held positions in the curatorial, education, and interpretation departments of the Williams College Museum of Art, the Museum of Art of Rhode Island School of Design, the Birmingham Museum of Art, the Yale University Art Gallery, Monticello, home of Thomas Jefferson, and the Fraulein Museum at the University of Virginia. And last but not least, Alicia Yerman is the curator of Works on Paper at the Whistler Studies at the Colby College Museum of Art, which is home to one of the world's most significant collections of artwork by James McNeill Whistler. Recently, Elisa served as consulting curator for Tate Britain's Whistler Retrospective and project lead for Whistler's Finnish Conservation Project. She is now organizing an exhibition and publication to open in July of 27, tentatively called James McNeill Whistler, American Origins and Transatlantic Ambition, 1834 to 1865, which will offer a vital reprisal of Whistler's early life and career in the United States and first decade in Europe. So we have a formidable and esteemed panel here for you today, and I will start by introducing Carol Jacoby. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. So I'm just going to briefly say something, just for 5 minutes, about how Whistler's world beyond Europe has shaped the exhibition and how this emerged from the exhibition. So in his 60s, Whistler jotted down some notes for a memoir, and he started, to begin with, "I am not an Englishman." And he parries in the following lines with some self-created myths. So he says, "In the press, I have been born in Russia, in France, in America, and of late, even in England." And he kind of claims origins in the American South. And that's as far as he gets. So when asked why he was actually born in the northern town of Lowell, he'd sidestep. He'd say something like, "I wish to be close to my mother." And Whistlerian lies do have a strange truth, we discovered. And his, quote, "fictions of my own biography," as he called them, declare a real refusal, I think, to be fenced in, to be categorized. And I think that refusal to be absolutely European or British, it contributed to his battles with European and British establishments. So for a century since his death, Whistler's career has been mainly thought of as European. And when I first began visiting collections for this exhibition, I was surprised how often I was asked whether I was going to plan to present him as an American artist, and it never occurred to me to present him as anything else. And Whistler did indeed return from America at 21 and made a career in Paris and London for the rest of his life. He postponed plans to visit his native country again until concluding, as his last illness closed in, one cannot continually disappoint a continent. But he was also indeed deeply informed about the European artistic tradition. He was a bilingual figure in the French and British avant-garde, an energetic reformer of their artistic institutions, marketing, criticism in those countries, as well as their art. And but I think this revolutionary relationship to European avant-gardes was driven by an American standpoint, even an American exceptionalism, and particularly a wider global view. So I think in 2026, we've been able to move beyond the Eurocentric standpoint.
There we go. Yeah, I think we've been able to move beyond the Eurocentric standpoint. And this exhibition, with the help of our visiting curator, Lisa Herman, and other scholars, looks at Whistler's art making in his teens, in Russia, in Britain, America, and South America. So 8 of the 18 catalogue contributors, 3 of whom we are very fortunate to have here today, consider Whistler's work beyond Britain and Europe, and we've very much drawn on their research. An experienced maritime traveller, Whistler had sailed halfway across the earth, west to east, by the age of 10, and north to south by his 30s. And his nocturnes transformed the harbours, the estuaries, the rivers that connected a colonial commercial world in his time. Even his late 60s saw him roving through Britain, France, Holland, Ireland, Morocco, Algeria, and Corsica, practically in a couple of years. But I think also of importance is the fact that expansions of empires and colonialization and global trade intersected with art across even broader geographies than that. So Whistler was a habitué and observer of ports and their diverse working populations, from St. Petersburg, where he spent his childhood, to The Hague, Venice, and of course London and Algiers. But finally, I think it's worth noting that Whistler's career coincided with the era of the international art exhibitions. And he arrived in Paris to see the first French World Exposition. And yes, he caught Courbet's Pavilion of Realism. He must have been really inspired by that sort of chutzpah of that. But remember, he also caught the first Palais de Beaux-Arts exhibition, surveying modern art from 30 nations. And of course, of special importance was access to the art of China and Japan. And we have foregrounded through this exhibition that sort of conversation, and tried, I think, to correct past Orientalisms, Whistler's including representing Nampo Joshi, the woman who painted the first half of the Japanese screen. And this is Adrian Moore recreating that screen so we could see it, people could see it in the exhibition. So to conclude, Whistler's generation, I think, were the first to see themselves as participants, as competitors in a world history of art. And Whistler's lived experience made him especially alert to this. And so in exploring this, through the first ever display of Whistler's teenage works and sketchbooks, which can be flicked through on the screens. Sorry, put that back. Which can be flicked through on a screen so people can see other pages. We've also explored it through a new look at Whistler's reciprocal dialogues with East Asian art. We see, I think, in doing so, Whistler's aesthetic and social defiance centered on his unique creative process as a kind of interplay of global relativism and ardent individualism. So I'm very grateful to the Lunder Institute and Foundation and my wonderful colleagues for providing an opportunity this afternoon to explore this more deeply, especially from the perspective of Chile, and thrilled to have Julieta here all the way from Valparaiso. Thank you very much. And I shall hand over to Diana. Thanks very much.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to Carol and to Elisa for convening this wonderful group. I'm here just very briefly to speak a little bit about the afterlife of this exhibition. I know it's only been open for less than a week here, but in a few short months, it seems, it will in fact be traveling to its first United States venue, which is the National Museum of Asian Art at the Smithsonian Institution, where I work. I think for a long time, we at the Smithsonian have shepherded another one of the great collections of James McNeill Whistler. Our founder, Charles Lang Freer, first met Whistler in 1890 and assembled one of the premier collections, and really through Whistler's death in 1903 and after his death continued to bring these works together. The terms of the will that Freer left the Smithsonian with, however, decree that none of these works can leave our galleries. So we have in fact been a thorn in the side of many curators attempting to pull together a Whistler retrospective for generations. So it is with so much pleasure that we, and thanks to Carol's determination, have determined that this show will in fact come to the United States, to our galleries, and will be able to reunite, and many times for the first time ever, so many of the works in our collection that will finally be in conversation with the best Whistlers from around the world. So you see here just one example of that opportunity up here on the screen. We're also excited to be able to show our audiences, as Carol suggests, just the breadth of conversations that can be had about Whistler's investment in Asian art and objects. This is an important thing that will happen naturally as our visitors see the breadth of our collections at the National Museum of Asian Art as they take in our exhibition. And finally, this will offer a chance for our visitors to see these works in conversation with the original Peacock Room. So Carol has done tremendous work to immerse audiences upstairs in what it feels like to be in that space. But I am here to tell you that being within the real thing is an incomparable experience, and allowing our visitors to experience that space alongside this really fresh new take on the Whistler exhibition and the breadth of his career is something that we are really looking forward to. So please join us in February 2027 in Washington, D.C., and I will pass this along to our next speaker.
Hello. Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us here for this great conversation. So I, like Carol and Diana, who spoke before me, am fortunate to work in a museum with one of the world's most significant holdings of artwork by James McNeill Whistler. With such an extensive collection, I have become increasingly interested not just in Whistler's creative trajectory, but his place in broader 19th century transatlantic exchange. This is why I titled my presentation Whistler, an American Artist. It is intended deliberately as an active and open question that I have yet to answer. Whistler is often framed as a cosmopolitan figure shaped by his work in European centers like Paris and London, but how does our understanding change if we see him as an artist also formed by his American experience, and in turn by the turbulent geographies of the 19th century? More importantly, why does this reframing matter to our understanding of his life and work? Walking through Tate Britain's galleries last week, I was struck by how the newer displays situate British art within broader social, political, and imperial histories. This interdisciplinary approach is essential. Artistic practice never develops in isolation, and even when museums focus on national traditions, we have to account for the global forces that shape an artist and their work. For Whistler especially, the transatlantic world wasn't just background context, it was the very condition of his formation. A compelling conceptual, albeit contemporary model, sits just rooms away here at the Tate in their presentation of Mona Hatoum's Current Disturbance. Here, Hatoum transforms a minimalist grid of cages into something unstable, where flickering light bulbs dim and brighten to expose hidden and often tenuous systems of power. In a similar way, for more than a century, Whistler's compositions have been interpreted through a seemingly enlightened language of harmony, quiet surfaces, and pure European aestheticism. But recently, attempts have been made to connect his work to charged transatlantic undercurrents of the 19th century, but still largely from a European perspective. For me, a primary source of these currents lies at his literal point of origin, the raw industrial engine of early American nation building. Born in quaint textile mill town of Lowell, Massachusetts in 1834, pictured here in this painting, Whistler was raised in a family defined by engineering, trade, and land use. His father, a West Point educated civil engineer, spent his life with a firsthand view of the infrastructure and trade arteries of an emerging American empire. Still, despite coming of age in the United States, Whistler is almost always shown alongside European counterparts in museums, a separation that the artist himself reinforced by repeatedly denying his birthplace. But his youth in America was in fact formative. While growing up in Massachusetts and Connecticut, Whistler honed an almost instinctual figural and narrative visual language, creating dozens of detailed and varied drawings. Often dismissed as the insular daydreams of a young man escaping into fantasy and caricature, the idiosyncratic and disparate nature of these youthful drawings can make them difficult to attribute to any meaningful American experience. But they weren't created in an intellectual vacuum, and instead show an imaginative young artist actively absorbing the people, places, and popular culture of 1830s and 1840s New England. Oh, oops. There we go. Yeah. In addition, one could argue that Whistler's transition to portrait painting in Europe was shaped in part by his proximity to portraitists like Chester Harding, who lived next door to the Whistler family in Massachusetts. Here, itinerant artisans served an expanding middle class with austere half-length portraits that prioritized recognizable likeness and a strict restraint of accessories over idealized character, which furnished Whistler with a pragmatic, likeness-driven grammar that lingered directly in his early Parisian paintings like Le Maire Girard. Although Whistler's move to Paris in 1855 was viewed as a rupture, it should be considered as a complex recalibration of American visual habits, a lifelong connection to his roots that is confirmed by his personal library, which included the 1902 volume American Masters of Painting, showing that the artist remained attentive to domestic art traditions even in his final years. But to conclude, I want to use my time remaining to highlight two key experiences that shaped Whistler's aesthetic practice before his permanent relocation to Europe in 1855. First, his cadet training at the U.S. Military Academy in upstate New York, and second, his employment at the U.S. Coastal Survey in 1854. Between 1851 and 1854, Whistler studied drawing at West Point under Robert Walter Weir, a prominent Hudson River School painter. Although Whistler's cadetship famously ended in expulsion for poor discipline, the aesthetic instruction he received was foundational. Weir did not merely teach technical drawing, he presented draftsmanship via European field guides as a strategic tool for surveying, mapping, and controlling physical space. In this federal environment, rendering the national landscape was an active exercise of state power that granted the artist cadet immense cultural authority. Critically for Whistler's trajectory, Weir's curriculum focused on immersive atmospheric views and subjective perception. Thus, long before setting foot in Paris, Whistler was immersed in a transatlantic aesthetic framework that privileged mood over literal transcription. By leveraging the artist's eye as an instrument of territorial primacy, West Point ironically prepared Whistler for his modern post-impressionist role as an agent claiming absolute authority over how the world is seen. Following his dismissal from West Point in 1854, Whistler spent a crucial year at the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey in Washington, D.C., translating topographical charts into precise etched plates. Far from a technical detour, this work placed him with a seat at the literal table of a mid-century American empire. Look at his sketches on the Coastal Survey plate, seen here. When Whistler was formally reprimanded for engraving unauthorized whimsical heads into the margins of this official government map, it wasn't just youthful rebellion. It was a structural turning point. This was the definitive moment where Whistler began prioritizing personal impression over the rigid literal transcriptions demanded by federal mandates. At the same time, we must avoid romanticizing Whistler's cosmopolitanism without acknowledging his complicity in these aesthetic programs. His education was never politically or artistically neutral. Indeed, his etching of Anacapa Island seen here is in particular transformed contested landscapes into orderly, possessible space while erasing indigenous presence. Betraying the notion that Whistler was ignorant of these views, his personal library once more suggests otherwise, with the artist having owned a copy of Paul Kane's text, Wanderings of an Artist Among the Indians of North America from 1859, further revealing an active engagement with colonial narratives that framed indigenous cultures through the trope of a vanishing race. Seen in this light, Whistler's pure art was not outside politics. it was deeply entangled with imperial ways of seeing. Some of these questions will form the basis of, as mentioned before, an upcoming exhibition and publication set to open at Colby College Museum of Art in July 2027, which will examine how the technical training and political realities that Whistler absorbed in antebellum America traveled with him to Europe through 1865. Far from a clean break with his past, this American background directly shaped his famous 1866 journey to Chile, where he witnessed the Spanish naval bombardment of Valparaiso and famously translated that immediate military violence into serene, detached marine nocturnes, applying the exact distancing and imperial aesthetics he developed years before. So to help us unpack these complex histories, we are joined by two extraordinary scholars and colleagues who will take us deeper into his journey into Chile. So I'm delighted to turn things over to them now.
Is that for me? There, I'm taller than anyone else. Hello. I'm glad to see some old friends here, and I hope to make some new ones along the way. I've been asked to talk about why and how Whistler was in Chile in 1866. And that story begins with concern that the United States, Great Britain, and several other European countries had when Chile declared war on Spain in September of 1865. By early February of 1866, there was genuine alarm when a Spanish Navy flotilla of 8 ships barricaded Valparaiso Harbor. Now, the reason for the concern was that these European nations had important economic interests, commercial, financial, in South America, especially the trade along the Pacific coast. And Valparaiso was one of the central hubs of trade in and out of that part of the world. So in response to the blockade, these other nations sent naval fleets of their own to Valparaiso. The U.S. and Great Britain sent about 4 ships apiece. France, Sweden, and Russia, in fact, also sent 1 or 2 ships. Oops, I went too fast. That's the Leander. That was the British flagship that showed up. Now, also, I want to include in this talk some reference to the American Civil War. That might seem far afield, but I see that war kind of looming in the background over a lot of what's happening in Chile in 1866. So in this instance, timing is important. The American Civil War ended in the spring and summer of 1865. Had that war still been going on, continuing, it's very unlikely that the United States would have had either the resources or the inclination to become involved in South America. You'll see some other instances of that. Oh, and I should say, too, about this fleet. They did not go to Valparaiso to intervene. That's an important point. They were there, as they saw it, as a neutral force, a buffer, hopefully to allow legitimate trade to flow in and out of Valparaiso while peace negotiations were going on, which the U.S. and Great Britain especially hoped to facilitate. Now, although the Chileans were disappointed not to have more active support from these nations, that is, to have them intervene, they did hope that they could perhaps purchase weapons from those countries. And they especially wanted torpedoes. Now, we think of torpedoes as being fired from submarines under the water. 19th century torpedoes were something different. They were fired not from underwater craft, but from torpedo boats, such as this one, which could be half submerged. And on board these torpedo boats were spar torpedoes, that is, long poles with explosive charges on the end, which could then be placed against the hull of an enemy ship. That's one very close up. There were also defensive torpedoes. We would call them mines, which, as you see, could be placed just beneath the surface of the water, ideally then colliding with any enemy ship. Bringing back the Civil War into the picture, it so happens that the principal inventors and users of these 19th century torpedoes was the Confederate Navy. So when the Chileans wanted to locate and acquire these weapons, they went in search of Confederate naval officers and people who had been part of the Confederate torpedo program. They were lucky enough to find one such fellow in London. His name was Henry H. Doty, D-O-T-Y. He had been, although he described himself as a merchant, he had been an integral part of the Confederate torpedo program and had indeed invented one of the spar torpedoes that was being used. So the Chileans approached him and asked if he could supply weapons in their war against Spain. And Doty said, of course I can. I can provide you 3 torpedo boats and all the torpedoes you need to blow up the entire Spanish fleet. I can put them on board my ship, the Henrietta, and we can be in Chile in no time at all. He said, I would like in return 60,000 great British pounds, a third of which would be used to blow up the Spanish flagship, the iron-cladded hull Numancia. The agreement was made. Doty began to recruit his people, and one of the people he recruited was James McNeill Whistler. There's a Confederate, or at least a Civil War connection there. It so happened that James Whistler's younger brother, William McNeill Whistler, had been a surgeon in the Confederate Army. He had left the United States toward the end of the war on sick leave to go and recuperate from physical and emotional exhaustion in London. So he was there in 1866. Now it so happens also that Doty and Willie Whistler had met in Richmond during the war. So they became reacquainted in London. Willie introduced his brother Jimmy, and somehow Jimmy Whistler becomes part of this rather harebrained scheme. It's not as though James Whistler was kind of dragged into this operation. I think he was primed, he was ready. He was at a place in his art where he wasn't quite sure of his footing. He was at 6s and 7s, wasn't really pleased with what he was producing, but also didn't know exactly what direction to take. He was looking for new subjects, new scenes. And so when presented this opportunity to go to South America, he seized it. Secondly, though, and actually primarily perhaps, Whistler was stony broke, as he oftentimes was. And the idea of perhaps having part of that 60,000 pounds, even 5,000 or 6,000 pounds, would have meant a lot to Whistler. So with that combined motivation, he was off. Now, he did not go to Chile on board the Henrietta. He had been signed on for what was called special service. He would go ahead of Doty and the Henrietta as an advanced scout, really as a spy or secret agent. He would mingle with the people in Valparaiso, in the hotels and in the markets and in the bars. Also, of course, he would ingratiate himself with the naval officers on the British and American fleets, trying to sort out, trying to determine exactly what the military and political situation was, so that when Doty and the arms did arrive, he could quickly bring Doty up to speed, and Doty could then act with alacrity to use those weapons. So Whistler left London, left from Southampton on the 2nd of February, 1866. Probably before he left, looking at this map, which he would become very familiar with. His first stop would be in the West Indies, at St. Thomas up here. From there, he would travel down to Panama, cross the isthmus by railroad, and then travel down the coast finally to Valparaiso. Oops. There's another similar map. That one, though, was drawn 15 years earlier by James Whistler, 17 years old. So he was familiar with the geography that he was going to encounter. What he was not familiar with, what he could not possibly have anticipated, was the great adventure that awaited him when he finally did arrive at Valparaiso on March the 12th of 1866. And what happened after that will be told to us by Julieta.
Well, thanks so much. First of all, I would like to thank the Lunder Institute for American Art, the Colby College Museum of Art, and especially Elisa Herman, and of course, the Tate Britain, particularly creator Carol Jacobi. For me, it's a privilege and an honor to be here today with all of you. Well, I'm going to talk about how was the city that Whistler encountered when he traveled to Chile in 1866. Professor Sutherland has already discussed the very particular circumstances surrounding that journey. On March 12th of that year, at the age of 32, Whistler arrived in the port city of Valparaiso, then the principal harbor of the South Pacific. We call it the Jewel of the Pacific. There, he not only carried out his studies as a wartime informant, but also produced at least 5 canvases in which he experimented with new forms of representation, painting, and composition, works we'll be discussing shortly with the panel. You have here the list of passengers, and we have Whistler and Mrs. Doty and a servant. Oh, sorry. Arriving by sea, the view of Valparaiso was striking. Along this, and I quote, beautiful bay with curved shores, as Whistler describes it, steep barren hills rose almost directly from the coast, scattered in the most picturesque confusion, with houses with small gardens and the pointed tower of an Anglican church. Below, the Spanish squadron and the neutral American and British fleet had already been anchored in the bay for several months. American adventurer Frank G. Carpenter described the arrival of the port in the following terms. About the bay is an amphitheater of hills, and this is a very important concept, amphitheater, rising almost perpendicular and forming the site of the city. The harbor was filled with ships when we came to anchor, and our first glimpse of the city was through a forest of smokestacks and masts belonging to the large and small craft in the bay. Despite being the country's commercial and financial capital, Valparaiso was still a rather rustic city, and it is in a way today. Most of its buildings were a single-story adobe constructions, and only a few buildings rose to 2 or 3 floors. Their barred windows in the Andalusian style struck some foreigner visitors as resembling unpleasantly prison gates. The principal streets were paved with cobblestones, but the vast majority remained unpaved, becoming dusty during the summer and muddy in winter. Moreover, the city was crowded with men, women, children, donkeys, and dogs, while the dust swarms with fleas, as the wife of the U.S. consul noted in 1861. The smell, too, was often far from pleasant, owing either to the filth that accumulated in certain streets or the dreadful custom of throwing dead stray dogs into the sea. Nevertheless, Valparaiso was by far the most cosmopolitan city in Chile, with a floating foreign population sustained by the constant arrival and departure of ships of all flags. Many of the port shops have been established by English, French, and German merchants. All kinds of goods were sold in far greater variety than in Santiago or even in many other parts of the world. As the wife of the American consul recalled, and I quote, "The city is adorned with magnificent stores, constantly importing from Europe and furnishing every article of use of luxury that can be required. The shop windows dazzle the eye with their rich display of laces, silk, and diamonds. They are silks made expressly for the South American market, and I have never seen such splendid fabric anywhere else." Among these exotic goods were Curaçao liqueur, which Whistler sampled on at least 3 occasions, and the famous ostrich feathers offered in the street by itinerant vendors. As a booming city and a popular summer destination for Santiago's elite, Valparaiso also displays fine hotels, especially along the central Calle de la Planchada. Unable to afford such comforts, Whistler rented a room in one of the second-rate but well-located waterfront lodging along the coast, the Hotel Lafayette. You can see it here. From there, he enjoyed a direct view over the bay and was able to observe the coming and going of ships. The hotel may have specially appealed to Whistler because of the way it was described in A Handbook to Valparaiso, a visitor's guide to the city. And I quote, "This newly decorated hotel, situated at the center of the commercial district, carefully appointed, enjoys a splendid view over the sea and Cochrane Street. The restaurant, carefully appointed, is recommended to amateurs for its service and the excellence of its refreshment at very moderated prices. Next to the hotel stood one of the city's most important buildings at the time, the Stock Exchange, here. Then considered the main financial center of the Pacific. I also suspect that it may have been from there that Whistler composed what would become his first nocturne, though that's a story for another occasion. The war also attracted many foreign inventors hoping to offer the Chilean government devices capable of infallibly destroying the Spanish squadron. For instance, Whistler mentioned Mr. Cumming and his machine, and he also records several trips to Limache, some 26 miles east of Valparaiso, where torpedo boats or T-boats that Professor Sutherland mentioned were apparently being crafted. A military foundry for this purpose was established, actually, the following year. So this is Valparaiso, Limache, and Santiago. Also working in Limache was the German engineer Karl Flach, creator of an iron submarine that tragically sank in Valparaiso Bay on May the 3rd, 1866, with its crew, about 10 people, including Flagg himself and his teenage son. You can see them here. The disaster deeply shocked the poor city and sparked several attempts to recover the missing submarine. Although Whistler never mentioned the episode, it must have affected him, particularly given his close ties to the crew of the British frigate HMS Leander, with whom he regularly socialized. Indeed, it was a diver from that very ship who managed to locate the submarine and attach a chain to it, though the attempt to raise it failed. Then the Leander was called to go to Callao because the Spanish were going there after the city bombardment. As part of his work as an informant, Whistler also recorded an excursion to Playa Ancha, where the residence of the senior officers stood, alongside the batteries that began to be constructed in order to strengthen the defense of the bay. He also made at least 2 journeys to Santiago, the capital, during one of which he met with the president, José Joaquín Pérez, or in Whistler's words, and I quote, or whoever the person then in authority was. The bombardment. Despite the limited attention Whistler devoted to this episode in his notebook, for the inhabitants of Valparaiso, it was a deeply traumatic event, not only because of the nearly 3 hours of assault from 9 a.m. to noon, but also because the city continued burning for days in various locations, especially at strategic sites such as the custom warehouses, which were there. Even so, most accounts of this episode emphasized its visual dimension and the effects it produces upon the landscape. The bombardment became an aesthetic spectacle for those who, like Whistler, watched it from the hillsides as if sitting in a theater, looking down over the scene in the bay that was both imposing and tragic. In the words of the Chilean writer Joaquín Edwards Bello, and I quote, "The fog, in love with the coast hills, blurred the graceful line where the sky meets the earth. Gunpowder and shrapnel overshadowed that morning, which began with mist and changed to clear. What an imposing spectacle! Amid the chaos, the Spanish vessel Resolución opened fire towards the spectator gathered on the hills, prompting Whistler to climb higher up the slope. And I quote, "The riding was splendid, and I, as a West Point man, was head of the procession. When he rode back into the city, girls shouted at him, 'Cowards!' From above, Whistler could take in the entire spectacles, the pyrotechnic, the atmosphere, the light, and the silhouette of distant ship dissolving into the mist. It seems the experience left a profound impression on Whistler. And I will leave it here to turn to a conversation with the panel about the influence this experience had on Whistler's later work, and especially on the development of his nocturne. Thank you very much.
So I think it'd be great for you to join in our conversation, or if you have any questions, I know I have, for our panelists, please join in. And again, we might have some comments from people online as well. There is a roving microphone, and if you wouldn't mind just putting your hand up, and then it will be brought to you, and then your contribution will be on the recording
you. I'm going to go back to this wonderful slide. It's just a nice backdrop. Can I start with a question?
Absolutely.
Giulietta, what languages were spoken in Valparaiso? We know that Whistler was, very fluent in English and French. How much conversation would he have been able to have?
Having into account that the foreign population in Valparaiso at that time was very cosmopolitan, but the higher population was Chilean, and then English, and then German, and then French. So you can be able to hear spoken words of all these languages. So yes.
I'm just going to say, and Whistler knew. Can you hear me? Is that? Oh, there. Whistler, well, he obviously spoke English, but he also was fluent in French and knew some German and Spanish and Italian. So I don't know if he could speak those languages, but he knew enough of those languages to pick up on bits of gossip he might have heard in the streets and in the marketplace. So he was a good person for Doty to have sent on ahead to scope out the landscape.
What happened? Did the deal go ahead? Did you get $6,000 or?
Oh, the weapons arrived after the war was over. This is why I always thought of it as a harebrained scheme. No, I could talk another 10 or 15 minutes about all the trouble Doty had getting those weapons there. There were mechanical breakdowns. They were chased by Spanish frigates. They had to recoal take on more coal on occasion. And when they finally got to Valparaiso, going down most of the coast of most of the eastern coast of South America, and then going up through a series of canals to get onto the Pacific side. They didn't arrive until July, and the Spanish had left. All of the supporting vessels, the U.S. and Great Britain, they were all gone by the time that Doty got there. So Doty actually was able to persuade the government to give him at least $2,000 US. Likewise, the captain of the Henrietta. Doty was not a sailor; he was just the facilitator. But actually a former Confederate naval officer named Hunter Davidson actually sailed the ship, and he got $2,000. Whistler got his expenses paid home, and that was it. None of the great fortune he was hoping to get.
Maybe add something. Sure. But the Chilean government, after the Henrietta came, they bought the ship. So it became the first training ship for the Chilean Navy. So it was not everything was lost.
Can you speak a little about the topography of the port itself? Because so many of these images have that kind of big strip that comes directly out and really dominates the foreground. And so I'd love to know a little bit, I don't know if it's still extant or kind of what the function was at the time.
Yes, Valparaiso is a very curved bay. So, Chile is a very thin country. So actually, the hills goes just almost into the sea. It's very steep. The hills are very steep, and then you have this narrow piece of land. So actually, they have to, and I look at this in the dictionary. They have to reclaim land to the sea in order to build the city. So, and you have many hills with different names, okay? And from there, you have a whole view to the bay, over the bay. So that's why we think that it must be very striking to watch this whole bombardment episode from the hills. So, yeah. Everyone is invited to go to Valparaiso to see them for themselves. It's a very beautiful city.
I was fascinated by your beautiful quote and the time you took to give us a sense of, after the bombardment, the kind of days of watching that smoke, or I should say the flames turn to smoke, turn to cloud, turn to mist, and then blow away, while still parts of the city were on fire. For anyone, that would be both an existential moment and also a deeply revelatory moment of both the power of war and technology, the human body, but also of nature itself, kind of cleansing away. And for someone like Whistler, I could only imagine that while so many artists are finding their way between the romantic and realism in the 19th century, it's all here for Whistler. He doesn't have to choose. He can just observe. You know, the same kind of stratagems of observation and reportage that brought him there, they allow him to move into nocturnes, don't they? With just watching the city come back to a kind of clarity of sky that had to have impacted him, so much so that then these colors through cloud, through mist, through reflection on wave, begin to become a kind of pointed and poignant language that he then carries with him for the next 14 years. It's astounding. Thank you so much for that.
Your description was very poetic too. Well, I was actually wondering why he was interested in depicting this artificial kind of fire, because of course you have storms, for instance, and you got these beams of light, but he was interested in the artificial lights that you can have in the sky. For instance, this bombardment or the fireworks. So while I was visiting the exhibition, I was thinking about this, and I think I came across a citation of Baudelaire and his vision of this new vision of art related to the modern city. So I think maybe he was looking for that, not the nature, but the artificial and the modern, and transform it into an aesthetic composition and reflection on modern times. So I was just reflection.
Well, I'm curious to hear from Joyce, if you don't mind, because you've done so much work into Whistler as an artist and his process. Just sort of, has anything that you heard today sort of enlightened how you're seeing these paintings, or no?
Okay. Shall I introduce myself? I'm Joyce Townsend. I'm a senior conservation scientist here, and we've been working on all of our Whistlers and the context of them prior to the exhibition. We've done a technical study of them, including Valparaiso. And I'm actually surprised at the calmness of the scene. You would think, considering what Whistler painted later, that there would be more illustration of the bombardment, the flashes of light, the smoke, the activity. But there very much isn't. This is a really calm scene for the Tate painting up there. One of our questions was it before or after the bombardment? We still don't know, but it's definitely not during, because it's a twilight situation. The light is falling, the ships are quietly at anchor, there's no activity, it's not battle stations, they're not recovering. In fact, they're hanging out their sails to dry, which you only do when nothing much else is happening and the weather is right. So it is a slightly odd choice in that context. And it's interesting how in the 3 finished paintings we see here, he depicted very different times of day. So this is one of the first explorations of the same motif, the city, but different times of day. And it's before he got to the point of painting nocturnes at a particular time of day, just when the light was failing. And there's a surprising lot of changes going on in that painting as regards the shipping, not the situation. The bay is completely unaltered, but there were originally many more ships. You can just about see them here, lots and lots of masts. He was working out where to put the ships, how to arrange them prettily, without much concern as to the exact details. They don't look particularly military. As they're anchored, you really can't see their size or scale or threat at all. And he didn't plan them all. A few of the larger ships were planned from the start. Some of the others he painted later on top of the sea. Some of the others he'd planned from the start he then ignored and didn't paint. He was really developing something pretty and totally unrelated to the idea of why he had gone to the city in the first place. So in that sense, it's looking forward to the nocturnes, which are purely capturing atmosphere. And this atmosphere is calm.
Could I piggyback on that and try in a very sporadic way to link it to something that Elisa brought to our attention in her conversation and talk, which is the quote-unquote Americanness of Whistler. When I look at flesh coloring green, it's very New England. It's very Benjamin Chapney, Fitzhenry Lane, Gloucester, Boston, into Portland Harbor. And it's interesting, we know that Whistler saw Fitzhenry Lane's prints when he was at West Point. I doubt that he saw any of the paintings. But that sense of 6, 7, 8 ships at a change of day, coming into or resting on a harbor, I feel like in U.S. art history, we kind of make that mood from second generation Hudson School to Luminous to more regional paintings, particularly around maritime scenes of trade, homecoming, a kind of restful ease after the U.S. Civil War. Chapney and Fitzhenry Lane are very much in that vein. And so in some ways, I can't help but ask, is Valparaiso, its situation in this amphitheater, looking out at the harbor, yet also a resonant of other ports in the Americas and other paintings of those ports in the Americas that Whistler might be thinking? Is he almost saying hello and goodbye to an entire hemisphere in a way?
Yeah, I think you're really right into sort of seeing some of those echoes in his work. I think Whistler's no different than anyone else who really can never let go of where he came from, no matter how hard you try. So I think as an artist, he would have been someone who was open and susceptible to those sort of views. Anyone who has been in Massachusetts at all knows that when you're by the harbor, at any point, at any part of the state, it stays with you. The light is different, the mood, the effect, especially there's always ships, there's always boats, something in the harbor. So I think that's definitely something that could have been resonant. Is there a one-to-one something to prove it? No, but I think it's exciting to be open to the possibility that he did have some of those memories with him.
Ships and harbors were such a global phenomenon because they're all traveling between. So, he's going to have grown up with those, because he lived just right by the quay, I think, didn't he, in St. Petersburg. And maybe this, is it a jetty, a quay, this jutting structure that was in front of his hotel? Maybe it reminded him of that. But those sort of ships, you're going to find them in Southampton, in Massachusetts, all over the world. It is a universal motif.
And that gets to something that you've said in the past, Carol, thinking about Whistler's always thinking about the market as well, and ship paintings are very popular in the 1850s and 60s. So even though he's doing something different, it's an opportunity to really think about atmospheric effect. It's still working on that level, isn't it?
Yeah.
That depending at some point, it could circulate in the market quite easily.
If you go into the exhibition afterwards, do have a look at a lovely print called Billingsgate, which I think is like a kind of premonition of a particularly crepuscular picture where you've just got all these different masts. So I think he's already had some success with that.
I'd love to talk then about the disruption that
Is that working?
there we go. The disruption then that the Nocturne in Blue and Gold represent in an otherwise idyllic landscape, because I can't ever really reconcile what precisely he's up to with what feels like this kind of slab that really disrupts what is otherwise a kind of very, in your beautiful description, Horace, landscape, or seascape rather, and kind of what he's up to. And we've certainly attributed it to an interest in compositional technique gleaned from Japanese print culture, but it feels like more than that. It feels, I have nothing profound to say other than I think these are very different compositions than what we see with the Tate image, and I'd love to chat a little bit about what that means.
Please do. The work at the Free Art Gallery at the Smithsonian was the date of that. Did he carry on working on that once he was back in London and exploring the Thames nocturnes? Is it? So
Yeah.
Is that why it looks different?
Exactly, and I'd point everyone also to the cluster, the spark of fireworks, explosion that we see in the top left, but that's clearly something that's preoccupying in the meantime.
I think. Let me see if I can find it. There it is. Sorry. It's even harder to see, but it's a slightly different. We kind of see the firework, I think. And the artificial lighting that you mentioned. I think one of the things that's going on is that that he's exploring this idea that the beauty that he's finding is in the colours, the atmosphere, these really experimental compositions that he's trying, particularly with the jetty. And that this would be obviously become the absolute underpinning point of his career and his departure from conventional approaches to art making when he returns back to London. And of course, that's a lot of trouble is waiting for him in London because of that position, because of those changes.
I wonder. I love that, Diana. Thank you for pointing us there. And I wonder if Juliet is helping us understand that Whistler has a number of apertures onto this scene. There might be a window at various kinds of angles onto the harbor and the jetty or quay from the exchange. There might be a window, either his own window or somewhere in the hotel, onto the jetty. There could also be hiking up into the hills or from a balcony, maybe on kind of that second level near the harbor. And so I wonder if during his meeting people and his months there, he's also thinking about different apertures onto the scene. And in a way, because when I look at the ones from your collection, they seem also very photographic to me, in a way, kind of like little glimpses of a moment, whereas this is more of a composed scene that might not have even actually been an actual scene. And so that's one of the things I would wonder. It draws me back to where is he standing and what is kind of a la prima or kind of done from life and what is composed more lyrically.
Okay. I was wondering about the same question, why he repeated the same scene like 3 times. So I think he was exploring with the geometric shape of the pier, which was the passengers' pier. And so how you could put such a big structure using most of the space, that's a very radical kind of composition. And actually the pier had a railing all on the well, you understand me. And he removed it, the railing, I think, trying to emphasize the rectangle or the shape of the rectangle. So it doesn't look like a pier at all, actually. You have also this phantasmagoric, ghostly people, as he does afterwards in the Falling Rocket, for instance. And yes, probably he sketched some other visions of the port as well, but yes, I have the same question, why he was devoted to this so particular perspective of the pier and the ships on the distance. Yeah.
Could you go back to the all of the paintings you had there at once, so you can see them, compare them? Yeah. We don't know the order, excuse me, in which he painted these, and I think we're forgetting that Whistler had painted many ships and harbors in the past. But the crepuscule and the nocturne are different, and it's the sky. You have to remember, all of his life he's been painting in the northern hemisphere at latitudes of 51, 49 degrees. Suddenly he's in the southern hemisphere at a latitude of 33 degrees. The crepuscule means dusk or twilight. And everyone in that part of the world comments on how the skies there are different at a particular time of the year, usually in the autumn and early winter, which is when he's painting seasonally, despite the calendar. And it seems to me that this is the launch pad for the genuine nocturnes that are to follow. Later on, he'll talk about an earlier crepuscule he did in France, and he'll refer to it as both a crepuscule and a nocturne, showing that he thought those terms were interchangeable. He didn't see any difference between them. And except for those two, those are the only two crepuscules that have that in the title. Okay? The nocturne probably wasn't painted as a nocturne originally. We just don't know. You see the dates there. He didn't finish till 74. But did he intend for that to be a nocturne from the very beginning? Was he beginning to see that the skies, that the world can be portrayed differently in this part of the world? And then he carries that forward and translates it into his paintings on the Thames, where the atmosphere is completely different. But the idea of having that sense of calm, that sense of mystery in many instances, I think, was born here painting these pictures in Valparaiso.
Does anyone have any, would anyone like to offer any questions? Or
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Bill Toomey. I'm chairman of the Whistler Society. And first of all, I'd like to thank you, Carol, and your panel for a wonderful discussion and conversation, as it should be today. Very enlightening, and it's enriched by the different perspectives that you all have. My second comment is a comment by Paul Gauguin, which said that art is either plagiarism or revolution. And I'm taken by Dan's description of Whistler as a young man. I reckon he'd have been 32, 33 maybe, in going to Valparaiso. You mentioned unsure about his particular form and technique and process. And I'm picking up, in particular from Joyce, how the experience of being in Valparaiso influenced him. And being an ex-West Point man, but never saw active duty, this would have been his first and perhaps only exposure to a major confrontation. And from Joyce's comments, I find it curious that the drama of that setting, that he didn't get a chance to explore that, which is why I would assume all these images are from before the bombardment. And if I just narrow in then on a question to you in terms of timeline, and then if I remember correctly, he left Southampton on 2nd of February, got to Valparaiso on the 12th of March, and unless I'm mistaken, the bombardment happened on the 13th of March.
31st. 31st. The last
31st of March.
Yeah.
So my other awareness of Whistler is that, particularly in later years, was more demanding of himself in his ability to finish paintings. So he really had a very short window to settle into the environment and I guess be taken in by the calmness, perhaps, of a setting that was about to erupt. And I can only imagine that a city that was set on fire and bombarded, that day-to-day life was suspended immediately. So, and this may be back to Giulietta, she might throw some insight. What would the city have been like? And was that it for Whistler in Valparaiso, that his 6 or 8 weeks, or even less, was his window? And again, this, I mean this constructively, are the paintings that we see, and the images we see, what might be drafts or sketches in his mind of what he might like to do if he was in a full-time studio? And so they're my questions to you, but fundamentally, thank you all very much for today. Thank you.
Well, I think, Bill, it would be impossible for him to have made these paintings before the bombardment. I mean, he had his job to do. He was the secret agent. I'm almost certain that all of these were done afterwards. Remember, he was there, 5 months after the bombardment. There was plenty of time for things to settle down. And it's fairly certain that he completed none of the pictures in Chile. They were all completed, as you suggest, back in the studio. Okay. But maybe Giulietta has, I'm sorry, didn't mean to surprise you.
Thank you. Well, I actually came across this other site, and it's also the name of the article of Professor Jacobi in the catalog, Painting from Nature in the Studio. So I found it's actually what he's doing here. So he sketches from nature, but then finishes the painting in the studio. And actually, for instance, in this painting, there are pictures of this painting without the bamboo sprouts that you can see there. So it was added in later years. So I guess he worked on these paintings many times as he usually does, even with the portraits. He comes again to the portrait, erase some part of it, makes the sitter pose again. And I think he does more or less the same with these paintings. So maybe we can have an insight from the conservation.
Yes, the only two paintings that we think he did paint whilst in Chile are the two sketches. So he was really establishing the geography of the place, helping to fix it in his mind, because he was going to have to rely on memory, sketches and things afterwards. And notably, they're the only two where it's not so easy to work out the time of day. It's daylight sometime, but the lighting is not the most important thing. And I do know that this painting, which belongs to Glasgow, I've been able to examine it up close before our present project started, and it's full of changes of mind and plan. Even the pier itself, he's had painted it in different widths at different times. He got the basic landscape, these wonderful hills, the view of the sky above, the shipping he painted over the water. It's really like multiple sketches on the one piece of canvas. And one of the reasons for that might have been because he left London in a hurry. He could only have packed with him whatever painting materials he had in stock. And as Daniel has said, he wasn't that well off, so he probably didn't have a good stock to pack. And soon after getting there with the bombardment, you couldn't just go and buy painting materials, though previously it had been a very well-found city, and I imagine you could have bought artist materials very readily. They were exported worldwide, and often from Britain and from Europe, in fact. But he must have been really short of materials to paint with. Obviously, he had paper, but he was, if that was in limited supply, he was using it for his notes and for his job, as you said. So really, perhaps this is the beginning of the nocturnes. You look hard, you remember, and you work from your memory when you've got time and opportunity and you're back in the studio. Perhaps this was training him towards painting nocturnes.
Also, there was a comment by a person who was there with him, referring specifically to the crepuscle. He said that he planned the hour when he was going to make this painting, and he prepared his colors in advance. Okay? So he saw the sky. He knew what he wanted to project, what he wanted to depict, and so he was ready to put on canvas what he saw in that harbor.
If I could jump back off what Joyce said, it led me to something, just thinking about Whistler's long relationship with the sea and when he returns to it. There's a really beautiful letter he writes from Liverpool to Walter Greaves in November of 1874, in which he says, "Your letter just found me. I'm sorry, I had to leave London. I'm so enamored and reminiscent for the sea. I had to get the sea back on the palette." And it was wonderful because then he goes into this long description of how disappointing the sea was. It was just gray and flat. And he says, I was expecting these blues, I was expecting these pinks, these purples, I was expecting to find light dancing. And it was that moment that it dawned on me, oh my goodness, the nocturne period, besides one in 1884, really only lasted about 14, 15 years. And starting from 1861 through Chile and into 1871, he paints 16 paintings at some point in that period of boats on sea and the beginnings of the crepuscle and then the nocturne and the twilight sky into the harmonies. But then the sea kind of goes away, and then it comes back again in the 80s, in the 1880s, particularly 1884. And then it comes back again in 1893, and back again briefly at the very end of his life. There's something one could imagine that Chile holds for him, that extended time looking out on the sky and the water, it stays with him. It follows him. He's searching for it, for his color again.
I think that's a lovely note to end on. Thank you so much. Can I just say before we finish that Whistler's the transcript of the notebook that Whistler kept on his way to Valparaiso, which is absolutely confusing but full of surprises, is available with Whistler's entire correspondence, which is online at the University of Glasgow. So not only can you go and look at the pictures on the Catalogue Raisonné on that site, but you can also read what he was thinking, what he was writing down, including a long list of jokes, which is quite nice. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. We so appreciate you being here, and I hope that you will join us for the reception afterward and another opportunity to look through the exhibition. I want to thank all of our panelists for being here. I think this truly represents what the Lunder Institute is about in terms of American art. Its experience and the complexity of that experience and identity, I think, is definitely reflected in Whistler. So thanks again for being here, and please join us afterward.